Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren. She, to be fair, did well in that poll. She's tied with Bernie in that poll. And ultimately, the ultimate fight might come down to Bernie versus Elizabeth Warren for this nomination. That's a fight, if I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter, I'm very happy to have. Because I think at the end of the day, I don't think Elizabeth Warren is as bad as Joe Biden. I don't think Elizabeth Warren is Hillary Clinton. But frankly, I think authenticity is something that's very important. It's what has attracted people to Bernie Sanders. It's what Trump voters thought they were getting. And I think if it came down to Elizabeth Warren versus Bernie Sanders, it will become clear that Elizabeth Warren is politically a calculator. She basically is going with the wind. And this New York Times article, which interestingly enough, the headline was changed. Isn't that interesting? Originally, this headline said, Elizabeth Warren is courting the Democratic Party establishment. Well, it was somehow changed. I tend to, since I used to work in corporate media, my theory is the Elizabeth Warren campaign called the New York Times and complained because they don't want it to look like she is courting the Democratic elite in this country to get elected. So the New York Times quietly, they do this a lot, changed the headline from Elizabeth Warren is courting the Democratic establishment to what Elizabeth Warren is quietly telling Democratic donors. And, if you're an Elizabeth Warren supporter, you might read this article and say, oh my God, she's trying to win, how dare her? But I read it a little bit differently. When Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts addressed a few hundred donors last week at a fundraiser for the DNC, she called for, quote, big structural change and hurled her familiar populist lightning bolts at the forces of concentrated wealth. But Miss Warren did not attend the event just to recite her stump speech. She had another, more tailored message for the Democratic check writers, state party leaders, and committee members who were gathered at the elegant Fairmont, San Francisco. Quote, last year I was running for re-election, but I didn't hold back, she said, reminding attendees that in the midterms, she helped more than 160 congressional candidates and nearly 20 hopefuls in governor's races. Quote, in fact, I raised or gave more than $11 million helping get Democrats elected up and down the ballot around the country and sent contributions to all 50 state parties, the national committees, and the redistricting fight. So, to tell you the truth, to paraphrase what Elizabeth Warren means, when she told the DNC that, I've been there for you, now you need to be there for me. That's what she's talking about in that statement to the DNC, in my opinion. So, okay, you might say, well, Jordan, she's just telling the DNC that she has supported Democratic Party candidates. What's wrong with that? Nothing tremendously wrong with that. To me, where we run into issues is later on in this story. Her point was easy to grasp. While her liberal agenda may be further left than some in the Democratic establishment would prefer, she is a team player who is seeking to lead the party, not stage a hostile takeover it. As Miss Warren steadily rises in the polls, she is working diligently to protect her left flank, lining up with progressives on nearly every issue and trying to diffuse potential attacks from supporters of Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Quote, I'm with Bernie, she responds when asked about what is perhaps the most contentious issue of the primary race, Medicare for All. I've already told you and reported several times, she's been all over the map on Medicare for All. One day she says, yeah, let's just get everybody inside a room and we'll work it out. This is essentially what she said at CNN's town hall. Well, we got to get everybody together around the table. These great pharmaceutical executives and these great hospital people and these great private health insurance executives. Let's just get everyone to the table with, the working people of America, the labor unions, and we'll all just be very, genuine and diplomatic, and we'll come to a consensus. This is what she told CNN in her original town hall. Then, during the debate, when there was more eyeballs, she raises her hand to end private health insurance. Then, when asked about it after the fact, she's not so strong on whether she wants to end private health insurance. So if health care is your number one issue, and based on the midterm election results, 41% of those who voted in the midterm election said health care was their top issue. It was the top issue of any other issue in the midterm elections. If that's your top issue, Elizabeth Warren is not with Bernie. She says she is, depending on the day. To me, it gets more problematic as we read on in this story. Yet publicly, and even more in private, she is signaling to party leaders that far from wanting to stage a political revolution in the fashion of Mr. Sanders, she wants to revive the beleaguered Democratic National Committee and help recapture the Senate while retaining the House in 2020. In phone calls, text messages, and small gatherings before her rallies, as well as in one-on-one meetings over hot tea at her Washington condominium, Ms. Warren is simultaneously courting and assuring Democratic town leaders, statewide officials, and the chiefs of the country's largest unions. Speaking of unions, Bernie Sanders just got the big union endorsement today. The United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, which is a 35,000 member union, announced that it's backing Sanders, which is Bernie Sanders' first union endorsement. So here you have Elizabeth Warren in phone calls, text messages, over tea, is basically courting, hobnobbing, doing everything that she can to endear herself to the establishment. There's no other way to say it. She's doing everything humanly possible to court, to endear herself, to suck up. And how politics works is she's doing this now, and there is an implicit, when you basically play patty cakes with the establishment, and I'm not saying every single person she's meeting with is, horrendous and evil and corrupt. I'm sure there's some fine people she's meeting with. But when you do this, what you're saying is, if you back me now, if you endorse me now, I'll be there for you as president. You need something rammed into a bill for your community, I'll get it for you. You need a little, earmark, something earmarked into a bill, a little, what do they call that? Something meat, they used to call that gets thrown into a bill, to sweeten it, to get votes. You do for me, I'll do even more for you. That's what she's saying. Bernie Sanders does not operate that way. Bernie Sanders has not, and you could say, some might say, well, because he doesn't operate this way, this is why he didn't win in 2016, and this is why he's not going to win this time. Some people would say that he doesn't want to play the game, and he doesn't want to basically bend over for the Democratic bourgeoisie of America. Well, frankly, I think, who you associate yourself with, who you are trying to court, who you are basically playing patty cake with over tea, who you encircle yourself around says a lot about you. Text messages and phone calls and having tea with the Democratic elites of America, and these are establishment party leaders, says to me, not only is Elizabeth Warren not interested in changing anything structurally, she thinks we could regulate our way out of systemic corruption in America. No. I explained this yesterday. We had a regulatory body that was supposed to be looking over big banks. Didn't happen, and we had the 2008 financial crash. We have a regulatory body that's supposed to look over food and water. Well, and the air and the environment. Well, Monsanto has a little bit more power than those regulatory bodies. So does ExxonMobil. So you could regulate till you're blue in the face until you get the money out of politics, which she is, frankly, not that strong on. She has said openly, listen, I'm not unilaterally disarming. If I become the nominee, I'll take that corporate money. And I will say it, and I will say it loudly. Personally, I would rather my candidate lose not taking the money than my candidate win taking the money. Because if my candidate wins taking the money, I know my candidate is no longer my candidate. I know that candidate is no longer only indebted to me. I know my candidate because he or she already made that rationalization among themselves. And this is all stuff that people like Elizabeth Warren and Barack Obama, they made rationalizations with themselves and justifications like, well, in this one instance, I got to do it. But it's for the greater good. It's so I get elected. And then when you're elected, I got to make this little side deal because it's for the greater good to get a Republican health care plan through, Obamacare. Well, the minute you start making those mini rationalizations, you're not a true progressive anymore. Of course, by the way, I want to be clear. Compromise is not a terrible thing. If Bernie Sanders becomes president, he's not going to get every single thing he wants through with the snap of his finger. He's going to have to compromise. The difference is, are we electing someone that is going to fight to the deaths before they give away the farm? Or are we electing somebody that right the minute they are elected, their tone changes, and all of a sudden, everything they propose starts getting watered down? Everything they propose, oh, you know, we meant something different, or oh, the conditions on the ground have changed, and all this. Elizabeth Warren, I'll read you just a little bit more and then give you my final analysis here. The outreach is not just an effort to avoid the confrontational approach Mr. Sanders took in 2016 when he inveighed against party insiders and the committee itself, which he correctly believed was favoring Hillary Clinton. Ms. Warren is also trying to allay concerns among Democrats that as a progressive candidate proposing sweeping change, she may not have enough mainstream appeal to compete with President Trump in the general election. Most of the other White House contenders are, of course, also wooing party officials, but the more establishment-aligned candidates like former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Kamala Harris of California do not face the same questions about their vision for party politics. They, of course, don't face those questions because it is known that they're corrupt. I digress. And interviews with about 24 Democrats who have been in contact with Ms. Warren reveal that her style of courtship has been unusually determined. Troy Price, the chairman of Iowa's Democratic Party, said Ms. Warren called him the day he was reelected to his post last year, immediately after the midterm elections and on the day she entered the race. Quote, all of a sudden the cell phone is ringing and it's her, not a staffer, he said. Ms. Warren's wooing could prove important should the nominating contest deadlock at the Democratic National Convention next summer. Many of the officials she is courting are the so-called, wait for it, superdelegates, who are able to cast a binding vote should the primary go beyond a first ballot. Beyond the potential electoral advantages, the relationship Ms. Warren is cultivating could prove just as powerful for symbolic purposes. So, to me, I know what the naysayers are going to say. I know that some people are going to say, Jordan, what do you want? This is how politics works. This is how the game needs to be played. You can't be a fire-breathing Game of Thrones Dothraki dragon to get elected. Bernie Sanders would have to play nice to these people. I'm not saying that Elizabeth Warren can't talk to party leaders. I'm not saying Elizabeth Warren should totally shun them. I'm not saying that even Elizabeth Warren needs to call for a revolution. I don't want her to do those things if that's not what she truly believes. If she is a capitalist down to her toes, like she says she is, then she could run on that. And let's have a debate. If it comes down to Bernie versus Elizabeth Warren, let's have a debate between Bernie, who says, no, we can't only regulate our way out of this. We can't, work within the system. We need to fundamentally blow up the system to create something much, much more focused and concentrated towards workers. But the problem I have with Elizabeth Warren is she's trying to thread the needle, and she's trying to have it both ways. Or, as my mama once said, she's trying to have her cake and eat it too. She's trying to portray herself as this person with bold ideas. And we can't, she was criticizing Biden. We can't go along to get along. We can't come with the incrementalism and this and that. Yet she's sitting down with all of the incrementalists. She's sitting down with all of the usual suspects whose DNA politically is small change is how things happen. Incrementalism is how we get things done. Politics is done a certain way. How in one breath could you be talking about we need bold structural change and then be spending half of your time when you're not taking selfies with people, which is cool, that's not a bad thing that she's doing, basically bending over backwards to get these people to endorse you? To me, that's not so genuine. To me, you're pandering. And to me, there's a difference between being willing to compromise, which I think Bernie Sanders is willing to compromise if he becomes president, and there's a difference between being willing to compromise after you have fought very hard for what you want, because there is political realities. Even if Bernie Sanders was a president with both houses of Congress that are Democrat, let's say he has the Senate under Democratic control and the House under Democratic control, It's not like Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and all the corporate Democrat gang is just going to say, Bernie, we were wrong all along. We welcome you with open arms. Let's do Medicare for all. Let's do free public college. Hey, let's spend $16 trillion on a Green New Deal. No, they're Republican lights. They're going to fight him, probably not as hard as Mitch McConnell would, but pretty hard too. What Elizabeth Warren is doing right now, to me, if you follow political history, what she's doing right now is what Barack Obama did in 2007 and 2008. She is portraying herself in front of crowds as a bold reformer. Barack Obama, if you remember, talked about we need a post-partisan utopia in Washington. We need to change the way Washington works. No blue states, no red states, the United States of America. And he portrayed himself as a progressive reformer that's going to change the system. Well, while he was doing that, he was doing the same things. I have a source that told me Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton both went in front of the CEOs of the big banks, Lloyd Blankfein, Jamie Dimon, all these things. And Barack Obama, while he was pretending to be, the progressive reformer who's going to heal the earth, said, what do you need from me? And apparently they liked what Barack Obama had to say more than Hillary Clinton. And that's why Barack Obama started getting record amounts of money from Wall Street. So I don't know how Elizabeth Warren is saying she's this bold reformer while sitting there having tea with Democratic Party leaders that don't believe in Medicare for all, don't believe in free public college, don't believe in a Green New Deal, don't believe in challenging companies like Amazon, Facebook, Raytheon, Pfizer, the list goes on, and don't believe in stronger protections for labor unions, and certainly don't believe and agree with the problem in America is getting money out of politics. I'm not saying, be adversarial and be, shun them, but you're meeting with them, you're obviously not talking, you're not sitting down with them to say, hey, here's why you're wrong and you need to jump on the progressive bandwagon. She's obviously not saying those things to these people. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.